Chapter 91. A special army formed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 91. A special army formed. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Hua Chiyun frowned at Lin Ran. For some reason, I don't think I will like your plan. Lin Ran grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. This means that your intuition is very accurate. L.Rg. Hua Chiyun pointed at the fruit in Lin Ran's hand. This fruit is called half Saint Parish. As the name suggests, it's poisonous to martial artists below the half Saint realm. Lin Ran's face turned pale. Although it couldn't be seen under the mask, his voice was already trembling. What poison? A sly smile appeared on Hua Chiyun's childish face. Don't be nervous. It's not very poisonous. At most, it's gonna cause diarrhea. Why didn't you say so earlier? Lin Ran shouted and wanted to feed Hua Chiyun one, but before he could do it, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. An hour later, Lin Ran and Hua Chiyun flew straight towards the next sect that participated in King Zhao's rebellion. I want to take back what I said. Hua Chiyun shouted loudly, his lips curled up in admiration. I quite like your plan. Lin Ran glanced at Hua Chiyun, who was 100 feet away, and then at the half Saint Parish in his hand. Come here. I'll believe you if you come over. Hua Chiyun didn't say anything and just raised his hand to cover his nose. Lin Ran was furious. He activated the Mystic Gate sword technique and instantly appeared beside Hua Chiyun. He reached out and pushed the half Saint Parish into Hua Chiyun's mouth. One for each of us. After saying that, Lin Ran disappeared in a flash, leaving only his hearty laughter in the night. For the next 2 days, Lin Ran and Hua Chiyun traveled day and night. Finally, before the mask began to lose its effect, they visited all the sects that had participated in King Zhao's rebellion. Among them, there was no lack of people like Zhou Hao and the Tao-seeking disciples who were sincere in repenting. However, there were also people who fought back desperately after being forced into a corner. Lin Ran naturally didn't mind killing those who fought back. Hua Chiyun finally believed that Lin Ran was not bragging about being able to kill the rebels with one strike. As for the sects that were sincerely repenting, Lin Ran recruited them. In just 2 days, the Heavenly Saint dynasty had an additional force of 30,000 people. In the war between the 2 countries, 30,000 people was not a lot. Perhaps not many people would be left after the war, but if the average cultivation of these 30,000 people was that of a senior martial master, it would be completely different. Most importantly, these 30,000 people were not part of the regular army of the Heavenly Saint dynasty. They didn't have a base or salary. Only Lin Ran's token, a small jade sword that carried the half Saint sword intent, could mobilize them. This meant that the Great Yong dynasty had no way of knowing about this 30,000 strong army in advance. In addition, the high mobility provided by the sword flight allowed them to appear anywhere at any time. For a battle that was originally evenly matched, these 30,000 people could almost be said to be the key to victory. In the subsequent war, this special force did shine on the battlefield. The Empress was overjoyed. Not only did she issue a decree to pardon these sects who had participated in the rebellion, but she also personally named this special army the Royal Forest Army. As for the meaning of this name, only Lin Ran, the Empress, and a few others knew. Let's not talk about the future for now. When Lin Ran and Hua Chiyun arrived at a small town outside the capital, it was already the morning of the 3rd day. This town was called Lotus Town and was dozens of kilometers away from the capital. The 2 of them were not in a hurry to travel, so they planned to rest in Lotus Town. Of course, there was another more important reason why they decided to stay, which was that the mask on Lin Ran's face was starting to lose its effect. Before dawn, the adhesive on the mask began to lose its effect. Parts of the mask began to fall off, making Lin Ran look terrifyingly ugly. Lin Ran had no choice but to wrap the entire head with a cloth. Then, the two of them found an inn in Lotus Town and prepared to take off the masks. Compared to wearing the mask, the process of removing the mask was much simpler. Hua Qian asked the waiter to get a basin of hot water. After soaking a towel in it, he slapped it on Lin Ran's face. Put it on for 15 minutes. You can take it off when the mask softens. Lin Ran nodded and said in a muffled voice, be careful when you take it off. Don't peel off my eyebrows. Hua Qian sneered and imitated Lin Ran's casual tone. Who knows? Lin Ran was speechless. Feeling bored, with a hot towel on his face, he fell asleep unknowingly. After a while, when Lin Ran opened his eyes again, Hua Qian was no longer in the room. The towel on his face was gone. He touched the corners of his eyes and forehead. There were no wrinkles, which meant that his mask had been removed. Lin Ran's heart skipped a beat. He slowly touched his eyes with trembling hands. After feeling the furry touch, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, this kid knows what's good for him. Lin Ran took a deep breath and muttered to himself. After confirming that his eyebrows were still there, he felt much better. Sitting up from the bed, Lin Ran saw a set of black clothes on the table. The sleeves and lapels were embroidered with silver patterns. The material and workmanship were ordinary, but it was still better than the old-fashioned sword god outfit. Hua Qian had probably prepared this for him. This kid. Lin Ran smiled and changed his clothes, preparing to go out to look for Hua Qian. As soon as he reached the stairs, he saw the waiter running up in a hurry. Lin Ran asked casually, "Waiter, where's the guest who came with me?" When the waiter heard this, he stood still and looked up. Suddenly, a confused expression appeared on his face. "Pardon me. Who are you? You don't even recognize me." Lin Ran suddenly remembered that when he came in this morning, his entire face was covered in a cloth, revealing only his eyes. "So it's you." The waiter was excited, but then he panicked. "Oh no. Go and take a look. The guest with you is about to be beaten to death." Chapter 92. Chi Deviation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 92. Chi Deviation. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. When he heard that Hua Qian was about to be beaten to death, Lin Ran's first reaction was that the waiter was joking with him. Hua Qian was at the 9th level of the senior martial master realm and had a lot of combat experience. How could he almost be beaten to death in this small town in the middle of nowhere? However, on second thought, unless this waiter was courting death, he would not make such a joke. Lin Ran hesitated for a moment before deciding to take a look. He followed the waiter out of the inn. Not far away was a market. At this moment, the market was filled with people. Everyone tacitly formed a circle. It was obvious that there was something interesting to watch. The waiter brought Lin Ran to the periphery of the crowd and pointed inside anxiously. "Hurry up and take a look. I saw blood just now." "Alright, you can go back now." Then, Lin Ran stood on his tiptoes and saw an empty space 10 steps wide in the middle of the crowd. A burly man with a fierce face stood in the middle. He was only wearing a waistcoat and was holding a heavy sword that was as wide as a palm and as tall as half a person. His exposed arms were muscular and he was cursing. The burly man didn't look like someone to be trifled with, but Lin Ran narrowed his eyes and knew that the burly man was a low-level martial artist. Not to mention beating Hua Qian to death, such a person was not even qualified to be beaten to death by Hua Qian. "I knew the waiter was fooling me." Lin Ran cursed under his breath and was about to go back when he suddenly heard a familiar voice from the crowd. "You'd better kill me now, or I'll make you wish you were dead." This voice sounded weak and powerless. However, Lin Ran still noticed it because it was Hua Qian's voice. "Excuse me. Excuse me." Lin Ran shouted and squeezed into the crowd. Although he did not use his internal energy, his physical fitness at the half-saint realm was not something ordinary people could withstand. Many people were pushed to the floor and started cursing. Lin Ran didn't mind. He squeezed to the side of the empty space and saw Hua Qian lying on the ground. However, Hua Qian was in an awful state. Her black hair scattered around, and her childish face was covered in blood. There was a terrifying wound on his left shoulder, and if one looked carefully, they could even see the bones inside. His white clothes were inevitably stained with blood. However, even so, he still stared fixedly at the burly man with the huge sword. His face was bulging with muscles, and his eyes were filled with anger, as if the person in front of him was his sworn enemy. Lin Ran rubbed his eyes to make sure that he wasn't hallucinating. He quickly squeezed out of the crowd and came to Hua Qian's side. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he asked, "Are you addicted to fighting? Can't you just not fight for a day? I came out to buy something just now and saw him bullying the commoners. Of course I have to interfere." Hua Qian was talking to Lin Ran, but his eyes were still fixed on the burly man. Lin Ran turned to look around. He realized that these people were all looking at Hua Qian worriedly. When they looked at the burly man with the huge sword, their eyes were filled with fear. Lin Ran reached out to help Hua Qian up, but just as he placed his hand on Hua Qian's body, his expression changed. "Where's your internal energy? Where's your sword intent? Where did it go?" Hua Qian panted heavily and glared at Lin Ran. "You still have the cheek to ask me this? It's all your fault. That sword technique you gave me is not right." "Not right? How come?" "I don't know." Hua Qian gritted his teeth and replied, "I came out to buy something just now and saw him bullying the commoners, so I wanted to teach him a lesson. In the end, just as I activated the sword technique you gave me, my entire body was in pain. Then, I couldn't use any internal energy. It must be a qi deviation." Lin Ran shrugged and said helplessly, "I told you to memorize the sword technique first and then I'll teach you. Why did you start practicing it without my guidance? Look, now something happened to you." Hua Qian was about to say something when the burly man with the huge sword suddenly shouted, "Hey! Are you two done? This kid challenged me to a death duel. If you want to collect his corpse, wait for me to kill him. Did you challenge someone to a death duel again?" Lin Ran's expression immediately changed. Looking at Hua Qian's miserable appearance, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You really have a problem that needs to be fixed." Hua Qian rolled his eyes with difficulty. "What do you know? It's illegal to kill someone without challenging him to a death duel." "Then good luck." Lin Ran shrugged and stood up. According to the rules of the death duel, outsiders are not allowed to interfere during the duel. "I can't help you even if I want to." With that, Lin Ran retreated into the crowd with his arms crossed, looking like he was watching a show. When the burly man with the huge sword saw this, he could not help but reveal an ecstatic expression. Although he looked arrogant just now, his heart was pounding. When Lin Ran first stood up, he used his divine sense to test him and felt like he had fallen into a bottomless abyss. The rules of the death duel prevented outsiders from interfering during the duel, however, because of the good deeds the burly man had done, if Lin Ran disregarded the rules and killed him, the villagers around would definitely not speak up for him. Therefore, when he saw Lin Ran retreat into the crowd, the burly man was overjoyed. On the other hand, Hua Qian was not so happy. Seeing that Lin Ran really didn't care about him, Hua Qian's heart sank. Although he usually bickered with Lin Ran, he knew very well that the only person who could save him now was Lin Ran. He watched as the burly man with the huge sword walked towards him with a sinister smile. Finally, Hua Qian couldn't help but say, "Hey! We've fought side by side before. Do you really want to see me die here?" Lin Ran shrugged and put on a casual smile. "Don't worry, when you die, I'll avenge you." Chapter 93. Power of Intelligence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 93. Power of Intelligence. Hearing Lin Rant's words, Hua Qian's face turned pale. If not for the fact that he couldn't exert any strength now, he would definitely get up from the ground and slash Lin Rant's face with his sword. Just you wait. I won't let you off even if I become a ghost. In the end, Hua Qian looked at the burly man with the huge sword and shouted fearlessly, "Come on. I'm not afraid of you." After shouting, Hua Qian closed his eyes and prepared to die. However, nothing happened after a long time. When Hua Qian opened his eyes again, he realized that the burly man with the huge sword was already gone. The passers-by who were watching the commotion had also left, leaving only Lin Ran standing there with his arms crossed and a sly smile on his face. What happened? Hua Qian looked confused. Did you kill him? Lin Ran shrugged. No, he ran away by himself. He ran away. He could have killed me with one strike. Why? Halfway through his sentence, Hua Qian suddenly realized something and looked at Lin Ran, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The rules of the death duel. The only requirement of the death duel was that both parties had to fight fairly with witnesses present. However, there were actually 3 more rules. Firstly, if one was challenged to a death duel, one must accept it, and the 2 parties would fight to the death. Secondly, there was no time or place requirement for the duel, but both sides had to fight fairly with witnesses. Thirdly, during the duel, outsiders were not allowed to interfere. Otherwise, the rule-breaker would be despised by every fellow Taoist. Hua Qian challenged someone to a death duel, so according to the rules, Lin Ran couldn't help him, but if Hua Qian died, Lin Ran could do whatever he wanted. Therefore, if the burly man wanted to live, he could not kill Hua Qian. Not only could he not kill him, but he also wanted Hua Qian to live a long life. Because once Hua Qian died, that unfathomable figure would immediately come to kill him. This was what the burly man thought before he scurried away. As for whether Hua Qian would come to kill him after he recovered his cultivation, he couldn't bother to think about it. After all, people like him had many enemies. In Lotus Town alone, Hua Qian had at least a dozen enemies. At the moment. After figuring it out, Hua Qian immediately felt deeply frustrated seeing how down Hua Qian was. Lin Ran chuckled and patted him on the head. It's all right. The good thing is that your brain isn't injured. As for this injury, forget it. Let's heal your qi deviation first. Hua Qian's eyes lit up. Can my qi deviation be healed? Of course. Lin Ran pointed in the direction of Mount Sword. Back then, I was cultivating all alone and figured everything out on my own. Of course, I'm a little smarter than you, so I wasn't as seriously injured as you are. But from my experience, it's not a big problem. Although Hua Qian felt Lin Ran's words were intended as an insult, he still looked at him and said seriously, "Thank you." Lin Ran waved his hand and helped him up. Hua Qian said, "I'll try my best to ridicule you less in the future. Get lost." The 2 of them returned to the inn. Lin Ran started treating Hua Qian's external injuries. Hua Qian was already thin. After taking off his coat, the wound on his thin body looked even more terrifying, as if his entire shoulder was about to be cut off. As Lin Ran cleaned the wound, he clicked his tongue and said, "You really should eat more. With your small body, you won't even be enough for me to eat." Hua Qian gritted his teeth and rolled his eyes. Ordinary food will cause the martial artist's internal energy to fluctuate abnormally. I've never understood why your cultivation is still so high when you eat so much junk food every day. Maybe I'm talented. Lin Ran chuckled. As he spoke, he applied medicine to Hua Qian's wound and wrapped it carefully with gauze. Done. Lin Ran dusted off the medicinal powder in his hand and looked at Hua Qian. Seriously, you really have to change your habit of challenging people to a death duel. If I had woken up later today, I would have to bury you. When I challenged someone to a death duel in the past, I was always more than 70% confident in winning, Hua Qian replied awkwardly in a low voice. Suddenly, he saw Lin Ran look at him with a serious gaze. What is it? Lin Ran asked, how do you challenge someone to a death duel? Are you kidding me? Hua Qian blinked. Realizing that Lin Ran was serious, his expression changed. Don't tell me you don't know what death duel is. Well, Lin Ran was speechless because he really didn't know what the death duel was. He had only heard the Empress mention it once, and that was when he learned about the rules of the death duel. Tell me what death duel is. Hua Qian glanced at Lin Ran and explained, death duel is a sword intent both parties left in each other's bodies. As long as the sword intent doesn't disappear, no matter where you go, you will be found by the other party. That's why the death duel has a rule of no specific time and place required. Lin Ran nodded in understanding. He suddenly thought that if he challenged the demon to a death duel, would he be able to find the demon easily? However, on second thought, Lin Ran gave up on this bad idea. In order to challenge someone to a death duel, both parties had to be present. Since they were already meeting in person, why was there a need for a death duel? After putting this matter to the back of his mind, Lin Ran took out the sword technique he had written down. The external injuries have been treated. Now, let's see if you are suffering from qi deviation. Where did you start to feel that something was wrong? From the third sentence, with a long whistle, you lean on your lonely sword and look at your heart. Hua Qian replied without thinking. It was obvious that he had already memorized this sword technique. I think this means that you should hold your sword on your back and let out a long whistle to activate your internal energy, then use your divine sense to encompass everything in sight. It's a move to be vigilant before the battle begins. Lin Ran pinched the space between his eyebrows. Yes. From what you said, I roughly know what the problem is. Chapter 94. Brat Transformation Plan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 94. Brat Transformation Plan. Seeing that Lin Ran had an idea so quickly, Hua Qian couldn't help but look surprised. Is that true? I'm already suffering from qi deviation because of your lousy sword technique. If you lie to me, I'll fight you to the death. Save it. You can't even beat a hooligan. What's the point of fighting me? Lin Ran teased. Hua Qian's face turned red and he stopped talking. After a few seconds, Lin Ran said seriously, there's nothing wrong with the sword technique. There's a problem with your comprehension of it. If you activate your internal energy in the wrong way, your meridians won't be able to withstand it. Hua Qian thought for a moment and knew that Lin Ran was right, but he still asked, is my comprehension really wrong? It can't be considered wrong. It's just that your comprehension of it is not complete. Lin Ran deliberately paused. After Hua Qian revealed a proud expression, he continued in all seriousness, well, it's more like it's absurd. The light in Hua Qian's eyes extinguished. Not only that, but he surprisingly didn't talk back. Lin Ran knew very well that this kid was probably feeling down again, but there was nothing he could do about it. Hua Qian had fallen to this state because he was too confident. When he handed the sword technique to Hua Qian, Lin Ran had said very seriously that he would teach Hua Qian after he fully committed the technique to memory. But what happened in the end? Hua Qian was quite hardworking. Almost every now and then, he would take out the sword technique and flip through it. Then, before he was ready, he started to rashly use the sword technique left behind by the 10-mile sword god. No matter how smart a primary school student was, he would still scratch his head when he saw calculus. However, Hua Qian did not scratch his head. Not only did he not scratch his head, but he even started to answer the questions confidently. It would be strange if he could get the answer right. Therefore, compared to Hua Qian's injuries, the most important thing now was to crush his overly arrogant confidence. Whether it was mocking him or not, it was all Lin Ran's way of teaching him. When Hua Qian began to understand his good intentions, it was already a long time later. At the moment, after making Hua Qian feel down for a while, Lin Ran asked, "Do you know what you did wrong?" Hearing Lin Ran's lecturing tone, Hua Qian was instinctively displeased. He pursed his lips and said angrily, "I know. Didn't you say it already? My comprehension of the sword technique is absurd. Looks like you haven't realized your mistake yet." Lin Ran sighed in disappointment and stood up to walk to the door. "I'll ask you later. If you realize your mistake, I'll help you solve the problem of qi deviation. If you still don't know, don't come with me next time. You have 15 minutes. No. I still want," Hua Qian hurriedly said, but before he could finish speaking, Lin Ran disappeared from the door. "What an annoying guy. Isn't your cultivation just a little higher than me? What's the big deal?" Hua Qian cursed angrily, but after cursing, he patted his face to calm himself down and began to think about what he had done wrong. At the same time, downstairs, Lin Ran ordered a pot of tea and a few snacks and asked the waiter for a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. Then, he sat at a table in the corner and began to copy down the martial arts technique. The name martial arts technique sounded grand, but it was not a shocking cultivation technique. It could not even be considered a cultivation technique. It could only be considered a science book about martial arts. Interestingly, there was a chapter in the martial arts technique that was dedicated to explaining how ordinary people could sense the power of heaven and earth. Therefore, many masters in the world were enlightened by the martial arts technique when they were young. Because of qi deviation, Hua Qian was unable to activate his internal energy. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. If he could comprehend the path of martial Tao from the beginning, it would be faster and safer to solve the problem. As for the martial arts technique that Lin Ran was copying, he had obtained it when he was wiping the Dragon Roar sword in the Tao-seeking sect. The Tao-seeking sect was not a special location, and it was not the first time Lin Ran had wiped the Dragon Roar sword. Therefore, before Lin Ran wiped it, he knew that the system would not give him anything good. However, he did not expect the system to give him such a book. However, the martial arts technique given by the system was very different from the version that was circulated on the market. Lin Ran didn't know which version was the orthodox version, but he could clearly tell that the martial arts technique given by the system was more profound. Even so, it was useless to him as a half-saint. Therefore, he did not take this reward seriously. He did not expect it would come in handy now. Lin Ran did not copy down the entire martial arts technique. He only copied down the passages on how to sense the world. After finishing, it was almost time. Lin Ran was about to go upstairs when he turned around and saw Hua Qian standing on the stairs. At this moment, Hua Qian was bare-chested, and his ribs could be seen clearly. His shoulder was wrapped in thick gauze. Even from nearly 10 steps away, Lin Ran could smell the medicinal powder and blood on him. "Why did you come down?" Lin Ran was a little puzzled. He had said that he would be back in 15 minutes. Was Hua Qian afraid that he would run away? Hua Qian didn't say anything and just lowered his head to bite his lip. However, because he was standing at a high place, Lin Ran could still see the conflict in his eyes. Lin Ran was about to ask again when Hua Qian suddenly said, "I was wrong for being too eager to succeed." Lin Ran was speechless. Actually, Hua Qian's fundamental problem was his blind confidence. However, his answer was not strictly wrong. Most importantly, from Hua Qian's heavy tone, Lin Ran knew that he had indeed reflected on himself deeply. Rome was not built in a day, and teeth could not be knocked out with a slap. As long as Hua Qian started to reflect on himself, it meant that he had begun to change. The first step of the brat transformation plan is completed. Lin Ran made a tick on the plan in his mind and nodded in approval. At least you have some comprehension ability. Take it. With that, Lin Ran waved his hand, and the piece of paper was sent flying by a wisp of sword energy. Hua Qiyun caught it and looked at it. This is martial arts technique. No, some parts are different. What is this? Martial arts technique. Lin Ran dragged out the word and put on a casual smile. New edition. Hua Qiyun made a speechless expression, then looked away and muttered almost inaudibly, "Can you tell me about this new edition?" Lin Ran smiled. The second step of the brat transformation plan is completed. Chapter 95. Courting Death. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 95. Courting Death. The two of them returned to the room. Lin Ran spent the time it took to burn an incense stick to explain the method to comprehend the power of heaven and earth. After hearing this, Hua Qiyun also gained many insights. One of the greatest insights was that he had wasted plenty of time. Next time, just tell me it's the same as the original book. Hua Qiyun looked at Lin Ran and gritted his teeth. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't beat Lin Ran up, he would have done it. Don't blame me. You made me explain it to you. Lin Ran shrugged. Then, his expression turned serious as he said, "All right, try it now. Forget all the sword techniques and cultivation techniques you've learned before. You're now a blank piece of paper. Use your purest state to feel the majestic power of heaven and earth." Hua Qiyun felt goosebumps all over his body, but he still sat cross-legged as instructed and started focusing his mind. If it was an ordinary person who had never cultivated before, just the process of comprehending it would take at least 3 days or at most a few years. Many people did not become martial artists in the end because they were impatient at this stage. However, Hua Qiyun was a genius after all and had been cultivating for decades, so he quickly found that unattainable state. Sensing the change in Hua Qiyun, Lin Ran pursed his lips and chuckled. He quietly retracted his divine sense. What he had to do next was to wait. Through recultivating, Hua Qiyun could allow his internal energy to sort out the meridians that had been messed up by qi deviation. As for how long Lin Ran had to wait, it would depend on the person. Hua Qiyun was very smart at that time. After realizing that something was wrong, he didn't continue to forcefully activate his internal energy, so qi deviation didn't impact him too much. According to Lin Ran's estimation, Hua Qiyun would recover in a few days at most. Lying on the hard wooden bed in the inn, Lin Ran couldn't help but miss the carved bed in the palace. It's all this kid's fault for messing around. Otherwise, we would be in the palace now. Lin Ran thought to himself. Seeing that Hua Qiyun was still in a meditative state, he prepared to sleep. However, just as he closed his eyes, he felt a powerful aura approaching. Although it was powerful, it was actually only at the 6th level of the martial master realm. However, in a small place like Lotus Town, this realm was already invincible. People at this level would either join the army or be recruited by the important ministers to guard their house. Why would they stay in a small place like this? After sensing it closely, Lin Ran's interest was piqued. There was a group of 5 people. The one in the lead was a 6th level martial master, and the other 4 were all mediocre martial artists. Lin Ran couldn't be bothered to care about them. However, what really interested Lin Ran was that after these people approached from afar, they stopped at the entrance of the inn. Soon, a commotion came from downstairs. Lin Ran looked at Hua Qiyun, who was still in a meditative state. He waved his sword and formed an impenetrable cage of sword energy, sealing Hua Qiyun inside and isolating him from the outside world. If Hua Qiyun was disturbed by the outside world and injured by qi deviation again, it wouldn't be something that could be resolved by recultivating. After making the arrangements, Lin Ran sheathed his sword and prepared to go out to watch the show. However, as soon as he opened the door, he saw the waiter running over anxiously. Seeing Lin Ran, the waiter hurriedly shouted from afar, "Sir! Sir, something bad has happened." Seeing this, Lin Ran's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand and gestured for the waiter to keep quiet. He asked softly with a faint smile, let me guess. Are the people outside looking for me? The waiter was stunned for a moment, and Lin Ran knew that he had guessed correctly. He silently activated the mystic sword technique and arrived downstairs in a flash. The door of the inn was already blocked. Strangely, no one came to watch the commotion this time. Not only was there no one on the road outside, but even the waiter hid on the second floor and did not dare to come down. But seeing their attire, Lin Ran understood. The burly man with the huge sword was shouting outside the door. Behind him were a few martial artists. The 6th-level martial master stood in the middle of the crowd. He was a young man in his 20s. He was wearing a red robe and a black crown. There was a slender sword hanging from his waist. He stood there with his chin raised and a face that wrote, I'm arrogant. The Heavenly Saint dynasty had very strict rules regarding clothes. For example, gold and purple could only be used by the emperor's family. If ordinary families had golden patterns on their clothes, they could be executed on the streets. This 6th-level martial master was wearing a red private suit. He was either a second-grade official or the top martial artist of the martial arts examination. No matter what, there would not be such a young second-grand official in the imperial court. Therefore, the identity of this red-robed man was obvious. Martial arts is really prospering day by day, Lin Ran couldn't help but sigh. If I had such an opponent back then, I wouldn't have been where I am today. At this moment, the burly man with the huge sword also saw Lin Ran. His face turned pale, and his words were stuck in his throat. He took a few steps back and almost tripped over the threshold in his panic. Seeing that he was embarrassing himself, the red-robed man couldn't help but snort coldly. Big brother, can't you be more steady? Why are you so panicked? Although the burly man was called Big Brother, he did not look like a big brother at all. He turned around and hid behind the red-robed man. Half of his iron tower-like figure was exposed. He pointed at Lin Ran and said in a trembling voice, he's the master I told you about. Hearing this, the red-robed man finally turned to look at Lin Ran. At this moment, Lin Ran roughly understood what was going on. It was boring here anyway, so he didn't mind having some fun with them. With a thought, he suppressed his realm to an extremely low level. The red-robed man narrowed his eyes. Humph. He's just a second-level martial master. Look at how scared you are. Second-level martial master. The burly man with the huge sword was stunned. He boldly stuck his head out and carefully checked Lin Ran's realm. Then, he looked confused. That's not right. When I sensed him before, he clearly what? The red-robed man glared at him and reprimanded him mercilessly, I told you to cultivate well, but you refused to listen. It's fine if your cultivation level can't compare to mine, but now, even a second-level martial master scares the wit out of you. You're simply embarrassing our Hong family. The burly man was scolded, but he only lowered his head and did not dare to retort. The red-robed man snorted and looked at Lin Ran with his chin held high. You. Get over here. Chapter 96. Teasing Two Brothers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 96. Teasing two brothers. Looking at the arrogant red-robed man, God knew how much willpower Lin Ran needed to hold back his laughter. However, not only did he hold back, but he also immediately bowed and rubbed his hands. He ran to the red-robed man in small steps and smiled obsequiously. My lord, what can I do for you? Seeing how humble Lin Ran was, the red-robed man's face was filled with arrogance. You called me lord. Do you know who I am? Look at what you're saying. Lin Ran chuckled. In the Heavenly Saint dynasty, those who can wear red robes are either second-grade officials or the top martial artist of the martial arts examination. Not bad, at least you are not stupid. The red-robed man nodded in satisfaction. He raised his thumb and pointed at the burly man behind him. My brother was challenged to a death duel by your friend. Do you know about this? I know. Lin Ran nodded repeatedly. My friend has had some brain problems since he was young. I gave him a lesson just now. Of all the people in this world, he chose to offend someone he never should. That's right. Cut the crap. Get him down. If he doesn't come down, don't blame us for using violence. As soon as Lin Ran finished speaking, the martial artists outside the door started clamoring. The red-robed man raised his hand and they immediately shut up. I just came back from the capital after seeing His Majesty and am in a good mood. Seeing that your attitude is not bad, I won't make things hard for you. The red-robed man glanced at Lin Ran and waved his hand. Get your friend to come down and take back his sword intent. Give him another 50, no, 500 taels of silver, and I'll pretend nothing happens. Io. What are you saying? Lin Ran clapped his hands and shouted, he offended your brother. How can 500 taels of silver be enough? In my opinion, he has to pay 5,000 taels of silver. 5,000 taels. The red-robed man's eyes widened. As the top martial artist of the martial arts examination, he was only rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver. Gold. Lin Ran added. The red-robed man was dumbfounded. 5,000 taels of gold was enough for him to live without worry for 3 lifetimes. The burly man was also dumbfounded. He mostly relied on his martial arts skills to extort money from people in Lotus Town. In a year, he could only earn no more than 10 taels of silver. 5,000 taels of gold was a number he couldn't fathom. If the two brothers were like this, there was no need to mention the lackeys behind them. All of them looked at Lin Ran in shock, not even noticing that drool was flowing out of their mouths. After a while, a lackey suddenly shouted. Don't brag. Who knows if you have that much money? That's right. The red-robed man instantly came back to his senses and pointed his finger at Lin Ran. Are you messing around with me? Your clothes are only worth a few taels of silver. Do you have 5,000 taels of gold? Lin Ran shook his head. No, the red-robed man glared and was about to launch an attack when Lin Ran continued, but I have something valuable. As he spoke, Lin Ran reached out and took off the 10 miles dragon roar from his waist. He handed it over with both hands. The red-robed man looked down and his eyes instantly widened. Before the martial arts examination, he was just a villager. Naturally, he had never seen the sword of the 10 miles sword god. However, he had eyes after all. When he saw the gold and silver on the sword and the dragon patterns on the hilt shining, he fell in love with it at a glance. He did not even need to feel the sword intent contained in it. Just these luxurious materials were definitely not something that could be bought with 5,000 taels of gold. Compared to this sword, the sword that the emperor had just given him was simply a burning stick. Are you really going to give this sword to me? Greed flashed in the red-robed man's eyes. Although he asked, he was already reaching out to take it. Of course. Lin Ran nodded and smiled maliciously. As long as you can take it away, it's yours. Deal. The red-robed man shouted as if he was afraid that Lin Ran would go back on his words. He grabbed the scabbard of the 10 miles dragon roar. This scabbard was completely made of gold and silver, but it was not cold to the touch. Instead, it carried a hint of warmth. This was one of the characteristics of divine weapons. The red-robed man was overjoyed. Just when he grabbed the scabbard, a surging sword intent suddenly swept out and went up his arm, instantly tearing his sleeve and crown into pieces. By the time the red-robed man reacted, the newly made red robe had already been ripped apart. There was no wound on his entire right arm, but from his fingertips to his shoulder, it was filled with sharp pain. Ah! My hand! The red-robed man screamed and was sent flying, crashing into his lackeys. Second young master. Second young master, are you all right? A few of his lackeys immediately went forward to check. The red-robed man gritted his teeth and could not speak. His forehead was covered in sweat the size of beans. He looked even worse than the homeless on the streets. Seeing that his younger brother was injured, the burly man became bold and fearless. He reached out to take the huge sword from his back and glared at Lin Ran. What did you just do? What happened to my brother? I don't know. Lin Ran shook his head innocently. Everyone is watching. I didn't do anything. He came over to get the sword and flew out. Does he not like this sword? The burly man widened his eyes and didn't know what to say. Although he didn't know what was going on, he was sure that Lin Ran really didn't make any move just now. Unless Lin Ran was strong enough to severely injure a 6th-level martial master with his imperceptible internal force. However, in the eyes of the burly man, this was impossible. He had already checked and was certain that Lin Ran was at the 2nd level of the martial master realm. At this moment, the red-robed man was helped up by his lackey. His right hand was still trembling, but there was no anger on his face. Brother, it's not his fault. The red-robed man panted heavily and said, this should be a divine weapon with spirituality. It will choose its master. I underestimated it just now and didn't show the sword my strength. As he spoke, the red-robed man staggered forward, his left hand above the hilt of the 10-mile dragon roar. The aura of a 6th-level martial master erupted, and his loose hair fluttered in the wind, making him look like a lunatic. Come on. Let the sword see what you can do. Lin Ran shouted with a solemn expression, but in fact, he was already laughing his head off in his heart. Chapter 97. A Crisis of Trust. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 97. A crisis of trust. Ouch. After a series of cries, the group of hooligans were knocked back down again. The newly made red robe was turned into tatters, but the young man did not feel bad about it at all because he had always fallen into unconsciousness. Aya. How did this happen? Lin Ran looked serious and puzzled. In fact, in order to hold back his laughter, he was biting his lip so hard that it was bleeding. The burly man stood at the door, looking like he was about to cry. Because of the previous lesson, when his brother went to get the sword, he focused almost all his attention on Lin Ran. However, he still did not find any internal energy fluctuations. Could it be that my brother is really not strong enough? But if that's the case, why is that person fine with it? No. He must be a master. The burly man thought to himself. His brain, which had not been used for a long time, finally lit up. At this moment, the burly man suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, as if a cold viper was crawling up on him. He turned around and saw Lin Ran staring at him with shining eyes. Why don't you give it a try? Lin Ran's voice resembled that of a demon's. The burly man's face turned pale. He grabbed his brother on the ground and ran away without looking back. TSK. How boring. I thought I could play for a while longer. Lin Ran rolled his eyes in boredom and put away the 10 miles dragon roar. After some thought, he took out an ingot of 10 taels of silver and called out, Waiter. Sir, what can I do for you? The waiter shouted from upstairs. When he realized that the group of troublemakers had left, he went downstairs step by step. Lin Ran threw the silver ingot over and instructed, Close this in. I'll book it for 3 days. This inn could only earn 20 to 30 taels a year. 10 taels for 3 days was a good deal, so the waiter agreed happily. Lin Ran flashed back upstairs and was wondering if he should sleep or go out for a walk. However, when he pushed open the door, his mind went blank. Hua Qian lay paralyzed in the sword energy cage. His face was ashen and he was foaming at the mouth. His body even twitched from time to time. It was obvious that he was suffocating. Oh no. I forgot to leave a gap. Lin Ran slapped his forehead. Before he went downstairs, he was worried that Hua Qiyun would be disturbed by the outside world, so he used the sword energy cage to isolate him. However, this sword energy cage not only isolated the outside world, but also the air. With a wave of his hand, Lin Ran dispersed the sword energy cage and quickly helped Hua Qiyun up from the ground. He asked anxiously, "Qiyun. Hua. Hua." After shouting a few times, there was no response. Lin Ran looked at Hua Qiyun's lips, which were tightly pressed together and covered in foam, and thought to himself, is he really going to die? Just as Lin Ran was about to give him first aid, Hua Qiyun finally opened his eyes. "Hey! You are dead yet. How are you? Are you feeling well?" When Lin Ran was overjoyed. He had never been so happy in his life. Hua Qiyun wiped his mouth and nodded. Then, an aura of the 9th level of Senior Martial Master realm rippled out. Although it was weak, it was filled with a strong killing intent. Lin Ran knew why, so he wasn't surprised. He reached out and took the sword technique that he had written down. "Keep it well. Although you've memorized it, you still need it when I teach you." Hua Qiyun glanced at the sword technique and unsheathed the sword in his hand. In an instant, a storm of sword energy tore the sword technique into pieces. Lin Ran's expression darkened. "What are you doing? I don't believe you." Hua Qiyun said coldly, "Didn't you say that you saw this sword technique in a cave on Mount Sword? Bring me there. I want to see the one written by Grandpa Sword God with my own eyes." When Lin Ran heard this, he hesitated. It was not that he believed there was anything wrong with the sword technique he copied, but the skeleton of the 10 Miles Sword God was buried at the entrance of the cave in a very rashid manner. If Hua Qiyun saw it, he would definitely fight him to the death. Hua Qiyun didn't know about this. Seeing Lin Ran's hesitation, he immediately said, "I knew you copied it wrongly. Otherwise, why didn't you dare to bring me there? Of course it's not wrong. I've been in that cave for 3 years. I memorized it like the back of my hand." Lin Ran nodded after a moment of hesitation. "If you really want to go, you have to wait for me here for half a day. It's too messy there, so I have to go back and clean it up." Hua Qiyun wanted to refuse, but on second thought, if Lin Ran wanted to take the opportunity to go back and modify the sword technique on the wall, with his understanding of the 10 Miles Sword God, he would definitely find the flaw immediately. Although Lin Ran was not a good person, he was not a jerk to the point of modifying the sword technique left behind by the 10 Miles Sword God. Thinking of this, Hua Qiyun finally nodded. "Sure, but this place is not far from Mount Sword. With your speed and the time you took to pack up, an incense stick of time is enough, deal." Lin Ran didn't expect Hua Qiyun to recover so quickly. His heart couldn't help but ache for the 3 days' worth of money he had just given to the waiter. After asking Hua Qiyun to set off in 2 hours, Lin Ran went downstairs. First, he rushed all the way to the outskirts of the town. Then, he rode his sword and flew straight to Mount Sword. In just a few minutes, the towering mountain of swords appeared in Lin Ran's sight. The tall mountain peaks were like swords shooting out from the ground, and the divine weapons were shining with cold light. Speaking of which, this was the first time Lin Ran saw Mount Sword from this angle. He couldn't help but be impressed by this powerful aura. He did not notice that after he passed through the mountain protecting array, the dragon pattern gem on the hilt of the 10 Miles Dragon Roar and the 7 gems on the scabbard began to flicker with a demonic red light as if they were responding to something. Chapter 98. Revisiting Mount Sword. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 98. Revisiting Mount Sword. Lin Ran was already very familiar with the peaks of Mount Sword. He recognized the one where the cave was at a glance and flew over on his sword. After landing, he looked at the narrow cave entrance in the cliff and felt the pure sword intent in the air that had yet to dissipate. Although he had only been away for more than 10 days, Lin Ran couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Then, Lin Ran walked to the side of the cave and passed through a curtain made of ancient vines. In front of him was a gentle slope. On the flat hill, there was a small mound piled up with gravel. The skeleton of the 10-mile sword god was buried below. On the mountain wall, the words, 10 miles sword god's resting place, were carved with sword marks. It was as if the entire main peak of Mount Sword was the tombstone of the 10 miles sword god. After sighing for a while, Lin Ran took out 3 dead branches from the bushes. As the fire-elemental sword energy swept past, green smoke rose from the dead branches. Lin Ran knelt in front of the mound and inserted 3 dead branches into the ground. He pressed his palms together and bowed. Sword God, I really don't mean to disturb you. It's your prospective disciple who insisted on coming over to see the sword technique you left behind. I couldn't talk him out of it no matter what. But, when he came over and saw how shabby the tomb was, of course, I didn't do it on purpose. Back then, my cultivation wasn't high, and the stones on Mount Sword were too difficult to dig. If he saw it, he would definitely fight me to the death, so, at this point, Lin Ran raised his head slightly and stared at the tombstone in front of him. He asked tentatively, "Can I move you to somewhere else? If you don't say anything, I'll take it that you agree." After waiting for a few seconds and confirming that there was no movement on the pile of stones, Lin Ran heaved a sigh of relief. He removed the stones and began to dig up the skeleton of the 10 miles sword god. Time passed second by second. The agreed time was almost up. Lin Ran had to speed up. There were more and more stones around him, but there was still no sign of the skeleton in the pit. Lin Ran began to feel that something was wrong. The stones on Mount Sword were abnormally hard. Back then, when he buried the 10-mile sword god, he was only at the Grandmaster realm. He only dug for half a meter before he almost exhausted all his strength. The stone pit in front of him had already been dug for nearly a meter, but the skeleton was still nowhere to be seen. Could it be that sword god found the pit I dug too small and expanded it himself? Lin Ran muttered to himself. After saying that, he realized how disrespectful he was and hurriedly put his palms together and bowed to the sky. If sword god didn't expand the pit, then Lin Ran must have remembered the location wrongly. However, there was only a gentle slope near the entrance of the cave, and the inscription he had personally carved was still at the side. It was impossible for him to remember it wrongly, right? Otherwise, that would be too brainless. After thinking for a long time, Lin Ran could only bite the bullet and continue digging. At this moment, Lin Ran couldn't care less about the agreed time. His mind was filled with one thing. Where was Sword God's remains? After an unknown period of time. Dioviko, the stone pit was big enough for Lin Ran to crawl into, but the bottom was still filled with rubble. That's weird. This time, Lin Ran was anxious. He gritted his teeth and rolled up his sleeves. Just as he was about to dig again, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. "What are you doing?" Lin Ran froze because he recognized that it was Hua Qian's voice. He looked up and saw Hua Qian standing by the pit with a frown. Beside him was a middle-aged man wearing the clothes of a mountain guardian. He must have been sent to take over the position after Lin Ran entered the palace. The two of them looked at each other as if they were looking at an alien. Lin Ran rolled his eyes and pretended to be calm as he stretched. "It's fine. I just realized that there's a pit here, so I wanted to dig it up and see if there are any treasures." Hua Qian cursed under his breath and pulled Lin Ran out of the pit. The middle-aged man at the side cupped his hands and said, "I'm Wang Kailan, the guardian of Mount Sword. May I ask who you are and when you entered Mount Sword?" Wang Kailan's tone was polite, but his eyes were filled with vigilance. It was obvious that he thought Lin Ran was up to no good. Lin Ran quickly explained, "You don't have to be nervous. I'm Lin Ran, the commander of the Imperial Guards in the palace and the former guardian of Mount Sword. When he heard the word Lin Ran, the vigilance in Wang Kailan's eyes dissipated. After Lin Ran finished speaking, he immediately cupped his hands and smiled. So it's Commander Lin. It's an honor to meet you. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Lin Ran pointed at the deep pit on the ground and probed, Guardian Wang, you're guarding Mount Sword now. Do you know if anyone has been here? Wang Kailan looked troubled when he heard this. To be honest, my cultivation level is low. If not for this young man protecting me today, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to reach the depths of Mount Sword, so, fine. Lin Ran nodded helplessly. He unsheathed the dragon roar sword and weaved it to create a sword energy barrier around Wang Kailan. This sword energy will protect you. My friend and I will walk around here. You can go back first. Yes, I'll take my leave. Wang Kailan bowed and turned to leave. Lin Ran turned around and saw Hua Qiyun looking at the gravestone he had carved. How's it? Lin Ran introduced matter. Factly, my design concept is to turn the entire main peak into Sword God's tombstone. Isn't the idea very grand? Hua Qiyun didn't say anything. He was silent for a long time with a sad expression before looking at Lin Ran asking, where did you bury Grandpa Sword God? I want to pay my respects. You can pay your respects here. Sword God is buried in this mountain. Lin Ran replied with a forced smile. Although he hadn't dug up Sword God's skeleton yet, no matter how deep this stone pit was, it couldn't run through the entire main peak, right? Perhaps because he was too sad, Hua Qiyun did not notice Lin Ran's abnormality. After paying his respects to the gravestone, Hua Qiyun rubbed the corners of his eyes and looked at Lin Ran. Let's go. Take me to see the sword technique left behind by Grandpa Sword God. No problem. Lin Ran agreed and couldn't wait to leave. After passing through the ancient vine curtain again, the two of them went into the cave. This is the place where Sword God went into seclusion back then. Do you see the sword marks on the wall? These were left behind by Sword God. Back then, I cultivated here for a long time. If you're interested, you can also cultivate here later. Actually, there is also a lot to learn from the sword marks outside. If you look carefully, you will discover that the direction of the sword marks is actually pointing to the location of this secret cave. I discovered it myself back then. Isn't it amazing? Lin Ran held the 10 miles dragon roar in his hand and activated the fire attribute sword energy to illuminate the area. As he walked, he introduced the cave along the way like a tour guide. Next, we're going to visit the stone room that Sword God used to cultivate in seclusion. Wait. Where's the stone room? Where's the big stone room? Lin Ran opened his eyes wide, as if he had seen something unbelievable. The spacious stone room had disappeared without a trace. At the end of the cave passage was nothing but a thick stone wall. Chapter 99. 9. Secret Passage Without Entrance and Exit. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 99. Secret Passage Without Entrance and Exit. Although many years had passed, Lin Ran still remembered the route clearly. After entering from the entrance of the cave on the mountain wall and taking 174 steps, he would pass through a narrow crack and see the stone room where the 10 miles Sword God was in seclusion back then. But now, after taking 174 steps, there was only a wall in front of them. What's going on? Did Grandpa Sword God sit against the wall in seclusion back then? Hua Qiyun's voice came from behind. Lin Ran didn't turn around, but he knew that Hua Qiyun had a suspicious expression on his face. Wait a minute. Something's wrong. As Lin Ran spoke, he pressed his hand on the stone wall and sent his divine sense into it. However, within 100 meters radius, he sensed nothing but hard rocks. I think I took the wrong way, Lin Ran replied awkwardly. Although he felt that it was impossible, it was the only explanation for the disappearance of the stone room and the Sword God's remains outside. Wrong way. Hua Qian sneered and turned around to walk in the direction of the cave entrance. After walking back for more than 100 steps, the two of them were dumbfounded. The cave entrance from which they came in had disappeared. Instead, there was another stone wall. Hua Qian was furious. He turned around and glared at Lin Ran. What's going on? What trick are you playing? Are you stupid? Why would I play tricks to trap myself here? Lin Ran rolled his eyes and walked past Hua Qian. He pressed his hand against the stone wall. After sensing carefully for a moment, his face turned pale. This is strange. Hua Qian suddenly grabbed Lin Ran's shoulder and turned his body towards him. Suspicion was written all over his childish face. Are you lying to me? No wonder you wanted me to wait for half a day at first. It was because, shut up. Lin Ran suddenly shouted, and the aura of a half-saint erupted. Hua Qian was caught off guard and sent flying by this aura. The blood in his chest surged, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing Hua Qian's pale face, Lin Ran calmed down a little. He quickly retracted his aura and said apologetically, I'm sorry, my mind is in a mess now. Don't disturb me. Let me think about it carefully. Hua Qian didn't say anything. He just held his chest and looked at Lin Ran, his eyes flickering as if he was in a deep thought. The fire-elemental sword energy dissipated, and the two of them were instantly swallowed by the darkness. In the endless silence, the atmosphere became subtle. Lin Ran knew that Hua Qian's suspicion of him had reached an unprecedented level, but his mind was filled with messy thoughts. First, the remains of Sword God had disappeared, and now it was this stone room. Could it be that everything he had experienced here was an illusion caused by the killing intent in the sword mark? No, that was impossible. The half-dragon roar sword that Lin Ran found in the stone room was at his waist. The black and white yin-yang sword was still lying quietly in the Divine Sword Technique Manual, along with the 10-mile Sword God's letter, Sword Technique, and the remaining internal energy of Sword God. These were all things that Lin Ran had obtained. If that experience was an illusion, where did these things come from? No, something must be wrong. Lin Ran frowned and fell into deep thought. He subconsciously held the hilt of the 10 miles dragon roar with his left hand. Wait. Lin Ran's expression suddenly changed slightly. At this moment, he did not activate his sword intent, but when he held the sword hilt, he could clearly feel that the 10 miles dragon roar was vibrating at an almost unnoticeable frequency. Hua! Lin Ran shouted, and the fire attribute sword energy lit up again. He saw Hua Qian squatting 30 steps away from him, holding the hilt of his sword and staring at him warily. What? Hua Qian asked with obvious suspicion in his voice. Lin Ran was speechless, but he was in no mood to care. He paused for a moment and hurriedly asked, Feel your sword carefully. Is there anything unusual about it? For example, vibration. Hua Qian was silent for a few seconds before saying, No, is that really the case? Lin Ran was overjoyed. He vaguely felt that he had grasped something important, but he still needed to confirm it. With a thought, the mahogany sword appeared in his hand. No, Lin Ran muttered. With a flash of white light in his hand, the mahogany sword turned into a black and white yin-yang sword. Still nothing. The yin-yang sword turned into the blue mountain sword, the blue mountain sword turned into the golden astral sword, followed by the wood spirit sword, the great abyss sword, the fire phoenix sword. Hua Qian squatted 30 steps away and watched as Lin Ran conjured divine swords out of nowhere in shock. Finally, after the 8th divine sword disappeared, no new divine sword appeared in Lin Ran's hand. Almost at the same time, Lin Ran slapped his thigh and said excitedly, I understand it now. His voice was filled with endless excitement. Hua Qian was shocked and rolled his eyes at Lin Ran. If you have something to say, say it. Why are you shouting? Lin Ran was not angry at all. He quickly untied the 10 miles dragon roar from his waist and handed the hilt to Hua Qiyun, indicating for him to hold it. Hua Qiyun looked suspicious. What tricks are you up to now? Cut the crap. If you want to see the sword technique, hurry up. Lin Ran urged. Hua Qiyun hesitated for a few seconds before reaching out to grab the hilt. Almost at the same time, he felt the hilt vibrate slightly. Hua Qiyun held his sword hilt again. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. Still nothing. What's going on? Is it a coincidence? It's not. Lin Ran shook his head with an unconcealable smile on his face. He was so excited that it was as if he had won the lottery. Including your sword, I've tested a total of 10 swords, but only the 10 miles dragon roar vibrates. This can't be a coincidence. Hua Qiyun thought for a moment and nodded. That makes sense, but what does that mean? This means that the phenomenon we encountered here must be related to the 10 miles dragon roar. I've never seen the 10 miles dragon roar react to something. Therefore, something must have changed when we came here this time. At this point, Lin Ran placed the 10 miles dragon roar on his lap and gently tapped the gorgeous scabbard that was encrusted with gems. I couldn't figure out why Sword God would use such a gorgeous scabbard when he's such a frugal person. Lin Ran looked at Hua Qiyun and continued, it wasn't until just now that I realized that Sword God chose these materials because they can be used to make array formations. At this point, Lin Ran raised his hand and drew a circle around the two of them. We're trapped by an array formation. Chapter 100. Breaking through the array formation with brute force. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 100. Breaking through the array formation with brute force. Hua Qiyun subconsciously looked around and frowned slightly, as if he was a little suspicious. Are you sure? Positive. Lin Ran nodded firmly and said, gold, silver, and gems are not the best materials for making array formations, but compared to those rare stones, these materials are already very good. Most importantly, you can get them with money. As if afraid that Hua Qiyun wouldn't believe him, Lin Ran added, I saw this in Sword God's letter. Actually, Lin Ran came to know that gold and silver could be used to create array formation in the secret room of the hidden sword pavilion. The 5-element seal on the stone door was made of pure gold. The nature of this precious metal was extremely stable. In order for an array formation to survive for as long as possible, the stability of the array formation was quite important. However, Hidden Sword Pavilion's secret room was one of the greatest secrets of the Heavenly Saint dynasty. Lin Ran was not sure if Hua Qiyun knew about it, so he could only tell him an insignificant lie. As expected, when he heard that Lin Ran knew it from the 10 miles Sword God's letter, Hua Qiyun didn't say anything else. He just raised his hand and gestured for Lin Ran to continue. Lin Ran rubbed the complicated patterns on the scabbard with his fingertips, looking hesitant. If I'm not wrong, this should be a spatial array formation. I'm not sure about the exact principle and effect, but it should be related to the situation we're in. Hua Qiyun nodded, his eyes filled with anticipation. Then can you break this array formation and let us out? Lin Ran rolled his eyes. This is an array formation personally left behind by 10 miles Sword God. Hua Qiyun knew that other than being skilled in sword techniques, the 10 miles Sword God was also unparalleled in creating array formations. Lin Ran's answer was basically a negative answer. After a short silence, Hua Qiyun immediately became a little irritable. He punched the stone wall and said angrily, then what's the use of saying so much? If we can't break the array formation, we can't get out. With that, Hua Qiyun suddenly thought of something and his eyes lit up. Why don't we dig it out? Lin Ran looked at Hua Qiyun as if he was looking at an idiot. He picked up a rock and handed it over. Come, try breaking it. Without hesitation, Hua Qiyun unsheathed his sword and split the rock into two. And then Lin Ran frowned and threw the stone at Hua Qiyun. You can't use a sword. TSK. Why didn't you say so earlier? As Hua Qian spoke, he picked up a stone the size of an egg and crushed it into pieces using his internal energy. Lin Ran handed him another fist-sized stone. Try this again. After Hua Qian crushed it again, Lin Ran handed him another stone the size of a human head. Hua Qian took a deep breath. What exactly do you want? Lin Ran didn't reply. Hua Qian took it. This stone was too big to hold, so he could only crush it with both hands. Did you notice? Lin Ran asked without rhyme or reason, his expression mysterious under the flickering flames. Hua Qian was about to shake his head when he suddenly thought of something and said in confusion, why is the hardness of these stones different? That's right. Stones in Mount Sword are very strange. The larger the stone, the harder it is. Lin Ran nodded and patted the stone wall in front of him. And what you're going to dig now is the main peak of Mount Sword. Do you know how big it is? Do you know how hard it is? Do you know how long it will take you to dig it out? The three "do you know" questions silenced Hua Qian. Lin Ran sighed and turned his attention to the sheath of the 10 miles dragon roar. Speaking of which, do you know why the 10 miles dragon roar and the sheath are stored separately? Hua Qian shook his head. When I was with Grandpa Sword God back then, this sword had a scabbard. It should have been left in the palace as a token when he went into seclusion, right? I think it's the key. Lin Ran muttered to himself and suddenly remembered the secret room under the hidden sword pavilion. There was a secret passage leading to Mount Sword that was opened by a necklace passed down from generation to generation in the royal family. Since that secret passage was left behind by the 10-mile sword god, could there be a similar thing on Mount Sword? Before Lin Ran could think further, Hua Qian suddenly asked, is the 10 miles dragon roar still vibrating? Lin Ran held the hilt of his sword and nodded. Hua Qian said, that means that this array formation is still active. When did you discover this situation? Just now. Lin Ran replied casually. After saying that, he felt that something was wrong. It seemed that he had felt the vibration of the 10 miles dragon roar earlier, but at that time, he was busy looking for the remains of the 10 miles sword god, so he didn't pay much attention to it. In that case, it was when I first entered Mount Sword. Lin Ran corrected his answer and paused for a moment before saying, the vibration at that time was stronger than now. I thought that the 10 miles dragon roar resonated with the sword intent here, so I didn't pay much attention to it. In that case, there should be at least 2 array formations here. Hua Qian thought for a moment and placed his hand on the stone wall that blocked the entrance. He continued, if there's only one array formation, this stone wall will appear when the only array formation is activated. It's impossible for us to enter. Halfway through, Hua Qian suddenly closed his eyes. After a moment, he shook his head. You're right. This is a spatial array formation. We're no longer in our original positions. Lin Ran was not surprised. After experiencing a series of phenomenons, he felt that everything could happen here. Holding the 10 miles dragon roar, Lin Ran said, there's good news now. The vibration has weakened. Hua Qian frowned. What kind of good news is this? Lin Ran patted the stone wall beside him. As long as the array formation is still working, this stone path will keep moving us through the mountain. Let's put it this way. Our position is constantly changing. It's impossible to dig our way out because we don't know where we are. Hua Qian instantly understood what Lin Ran meant and continued, so we know that when the array formation stops, we might return to our previous positions. Even if we can't, our position is relatively fixed, so we can dig it out at that time. But didn't you say that this stone is very hard? In the current situation, we can only use force to break through. Lin Ran leaned against the stone wall. It was obvious that he had already begun to give up. As he spoke, he threw the 10 miles dragon roar to Hua Qian. Why don't you study the array formation on it? You might be able to control the array formation to send us out. Hua Qiyun caught the 10 miles dragon roar and looked at the complicated patterns. He felt dizzy and quickly returned it to Lin Ran. Let's do it your way. Your way is quite good. With that, Hua Qiyun also sat down against the stone wall. Lin Ran extinguished the fire attribute spiritual energy, and the darkness swallowed the two of them again.